Another twist in the investigation into the tragic death of Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy. Authorities sharing a new timeline, plus new details from the couple's wills.
While Gene Hackman's life in Hollywood was an open story of success, his passing was a closed story of mysteries.
I am fascinated by the mystery around Gene Hackman's death. It is a tragic, tragic death.
From the confusing dates in official records to the secret legal battles over his fortune, public attention has now turned to Gene's daughter as the person behind the tragedy. For someone who prefers to lead a private life, how did Gene's daughter get pulled into this drama, and what could she have done to warrant a sentencing? Join us as we unpack the real stories behind these claims and her alleged sentencing.
Arakawa had a hantavirus, a rare virus linked to rodents, on February 11th, and Hackman, from a cardiac event on February 18th, 7 days apart, worsened by advanced Alzheimer's and severe heart disease.
The tragedy that shocked Hollywood. After a long and successful career in Hollywood, the famous and beloved Gene Hackman settled down to lead a private life with his wife, Betsy, at a quiet home in Santa Fe. He was missed by many in Hollywood, but most fans were happy that old Gene was finally able to rest and focus on his writing career in the comfort of his mansion. That was the narrative we all believed. But everything changed on February 26 with a shocking event that turned Hollywood on its head. That was the day when Jesse Kessler, Gene Hackman's trusted colleague and longtime contractor, came to their home in Santa Fe to check on the house. He arrived that day because a neighbor who lived a short distance down the hill of the Santa Fe summit had called in. After all, he felt something wasn't right with their retired actor. The first concern he had was that Gene never forgot to take his dogs out for a walk at least once every 2 to 3 days. He loved doing this each day despite his old age, and it was perhaps his favorite morning routine, aside from painting and writing. But now it has been well over a week since he was seen walking down the hill with his German Shepherd and Australian Kelpie. His concern was that Gene and his wife lived very quiet and secluded lives, implying that something horrific could have happened to both of them behind closed doors without anyone knowing. For this reason, the neighbor called Gene's contractor, Jesse Kessler, to take a closer look at the mansion to make sure everything was all right with the retired actor. Wanting to do a wellness check, Jesse got to the mansion as the neighbor asked. After all, not only was Gene a good friend and client, but as his contractor, Jesse was also responsible for maintaining the property. And sadly, the neighbor was right. Something had gone wrong, and the details disclosed were quite disturbing. The first shock came when Jesse got to the front door of the mansion and found it ajar. This was alarming because the last time any of them was seen outside was over a week before. It was unusual for them to leave their door unlocked, so he hesitated for a while before taking the first step inside. As he moved through the foyer, he found Gene Hackman lying on the ground of the mudroom looking pale. His walking cane and sunglasses were nearby and in unusual positions, showing that he had collapsed without warning. His face looked peaceful, but the position of his body suggested he fell unexpectedly. This seemed to have explained everything until the next big question popped up in his mind. What happened to his wife? Believing there was more to this, Jesse stepped further inside, wanting to confirm if she was in the house as well. As he searched, he came across 2 of Gene's dogs. They were very much alive and agile, but one of them wasn't so lucky. Sadly, Gene's beloved Australian Kelpie named Zinfandel was found locked in a crate about 10 feet away from his body. The dog's body looked exhausted and dehydrated, implying it had been trapped there for over a week with nothing to live on. Things got a lot more frightening as he looked deeper and found the bathroom door further in, slightly open, as the front of the mansion was. Scared he was going to discover something similar, he approached the door with caution, only to find Gene's wife, Betsy, lying lifeless as well. Betsy was lying on the floor near a space heater with her prescription pills scattered across the top of the counter. It seems she had also given in to a sudden event. At first glance, there was no sign of violence or foul play. It was just an unlucky day for Gene and his wife, with sudden tragedies hitting both of them at the same time. Or was it? Without trying to solve the mystery on his own, Jesse called a security guard who had been monitoring the property but wasn't authorized to go in for a long time. Both of them decided to call the authorities. According to the police, the call was brief and sounded very urgent. And within minutes, law enforcement arrived at the scene to investigate. But even though the scene was carefully inspected for hours, the authorities were just as puzzled as Jesse and the guard were. Simply put, there was no sign that showed a crime was committed. They carried out tests for smoke poisoning through carbon monoxide leaks or gas-related issues, but none of them made sense. On top of that, the bodies had been lifeless for at least a week, and there were no fingerprints or signs that their bodies were checked on before Jesse and the guard came in. Later on, they were able to make out from his pacemaker, a device implanted into his chest to record his heart's activity, that he likely died on February 17th, about 9 days before the body was found by Jesse. This aligned very well with the report given by the neighbor, but that was where all the needed answers came to a halt. All that came after were unanswered questions investigators are still struggling with today. Most of these were due to misinformation found in the official reports given immediately after the bodies were found and examined by the authorities.
But our investigation shows that all the last known communication and activity from Ms. Arakawa was on February 11th.
Most of them didn't make sense, and the ones that did only raised more difficult questions. The official reports state that Gene Hackman had been battling health issues at the time and died from major heart and Alzheimer's disease. Betsy, his wife, was said to have died from hantavirus on February 11th, a disease caused by rats that had become quite common in the area. But this is where it gets interesting. Not long after the official reports were put out by the authorities, Betsy's doctor, Josiah Child, a resident physician at Cloudberry Health in Santa Fe, spoke out by saying Betsy called his hospital on February 12th about her health. This, of course, was a big red flag for many fans demanding a good answer about the couple's true cause of death. How in the world could Betsy have called her doctor a full day after her death? It made people wonder whether the reported date of death was just an error by a typist or a wrong story put out there to cover up something sinister. Could she have died much earlier than we thought? This seems to be the case, as some reports say that the first report was that she passed away on February 17th, on the same day as her husband. Then it got changed to February 12th and later became February 11th, after the doctor from Cloudberry Health spoke up about the issue. In his statement, Dr. Josiah pointed out how absurd the official reports were. As far as he knows, there is no way Betsy could have died from hantavirus. According to the doctor, we can be sure of this because of the nature of the disease. A person struggling with such a disease to the point of dying a few days later would have too many difficulties with breathing, let alone talking on the phone. The doctor stated that Betsy never coughed during the calls. She never wheezed or even sounded like she had shortness of breath. She sounded strong enough for her age, and what she called to complain about was minor congestion, a condition that is quite common when we look at the other health issues she was facing at the time. It was a difficult condition, but in no way could be linked to immediate death. The doctor also stated that death from hantavirus among people serious with their medication is very rare, and Betsy was not an exception, since she always took her treatment seriously. Her call to the hospital on February 11th over the smallest symptoms was good proof of that. So death from hantavirus was highly unlikely, and sadly enough, things only got more complicated from there. As we shall see, Betsy's death came with a legal twist that made Gene's grieving family the center of attention. Gene Hackman's will had a few odd provisions about his property, specifically what would happen to his immense wealth if anything happened to him. With these documents came all the accusing fingers, pointing to one member of his family as the main cause of the couple's death. This happened for multiple reasons. The first one is that on most occasions, a rich person's property is normally shared by the family, most particularly between the spouse and children. However, the agreement did not include benefits for any of his children. In the scenario where any of them died and the spouse was not alive to inherit the property, everything was to be sold immediately. Interestingly enough, the money from the sales was to be given not to the children or anyone in his family, but to charity. This was strange on so many levels, as it meant that not a single cent would go to his children if anything happened to him. Because of the strange nature of these documents, people started asking whether this was done by a member of the family to lay claim on his property, and this is where Gene Hackman's daughter comes in. The daughter's involvement. The accusations started pouring in when Gene's daughter, Leslie Anna Allen, was investigated by the authorities after her father's death was made public. During the first investigation, Kessler claimed that her father was in good health before his death in February. She sounded very certain about it, implying that her father's death was a sudden accident. After all, Jesse Kessler and the security guard found his body lying in an awkward position that suggested he fell and died almost immediately from the impact. But after a few weeks of careful digging, the investigators showed that Leslie's statement wasn't correct. She repeated this statement in a short interview with the Daily Mail. There, she doubled down on what she said, that her father was healthy and there were no issues as far as she was concerned. During the talk, Leslie pointed out that her father liked taking long walks with his dogs almost every morning and loved doing Pilates and yoga several times a week. When she was confronted with what the investigators found, Leslie stated that she hadn't seen her father or Betsy for over 3 months. When asked why, she admitted that they lived very far from each other, with her father living in Santa Fe while she resided in California, but still insisted that they were close enough for her to be sure and that there was nothing wrong with him. Everything was good according to her, but Chief Medical Investigator Dr. Heather Jarrell begged to differ.
The circumstances surrounding these two deaths, that it is unprecedented dissemination of important information.
She confirmed in another interview that the former actor was in a very poor state of health, and he had been in that condition for a long time. Keep in mind that although Dr. Heather wasn't Gene's physician, she was the person in charge of the autopsy and wanted to get to the bottom of this case. To do this, she talked with the doctors and health professionals who helped Gene Hackman in recent months. Based on all the info he got along the way, Dr. Heather stated that Gene showed very obvious signs of advanced Alzheimer's disease several months before February. The signs were too obvious to think he was doing just fine. Common symptoms such as forgetting the names of close people he knew, getting easily confused about the flow of time, and repeating the same question too many times in very short conversations were described by all the doctors who checked on him. He also sounded very tired on the phone, even for the average person in his mid-90s. Because of this, Dr. Heather Jarrell concluded that he died from these diseases.
Mr. Gene Hackman, the cause of death with Alzheimer's disease as a significant contributory factor.
Her autopsy implied that Gene Hackman suffered from severe heart disease with evidence of previous heart attacks and many kidney changes because of his high blood pressure.
Evidence of prior heart attacks and severe changes of the kidneys due to chronic high blood pressure.
These symptoms soon became the official cause of death after over a week of uncertainty. With that out of the way, all eyes were now focused on the person who claimed her father was in perfect health all along. With very persistent symptoms going back over a year before his death, many found it strange that his daughter would boldly claim that her father was always in good health with no concerns every time they got in contact. Interestingly enough, this wasn't the strange part. What made headlines instead was what happened immediately after this report was revealed by the doctor. You see, it was also revealed just a few days after Heather Jarrell's revelation that Gene's family wasn't comfortable with letting people know his true cause of death. They also wanted to block the photos and videos of the couple's bodies, their dogs' remains, and the whole scene in the mansion. It took a lot of effort for Dr. Heather to get news of the autopsy to the public, and even a huge chunk of the death investigation reports we know today were held back by the family for quite a while. It got so bad that an insider close to the investigation that was later revealed in less detail told the U.S. Sun that none of those who worked on the case had ever in their career heard of a family trying to block autopsy reports in New Mexico. He stated that trying to block the autopsy report at a time when people are trying to know the real cause of death is something he's never seen before. The last time this happened was with the photos of famous pop star Michael Jackson and the death of Helena Hutchings. New Mexico had no exemption to this, but it was still unusual. It gets much more interesting when we find out that the Santa Fe court on the side of Gene Hackman's family put a restraining order on the sheriff and medical investigators from releasing any photos or videos of the scene or anything in the mansion. What was Leslie's hand in all of this? Stay till the end as we break down the reasons and motivations behind her alleged involvement in sentencing for Gene Hackman's death. But brace yourself, dear viewer, because you are in for a huge surprise. Reasons behind the accusations. There are many reasons why Gene Hackman's daughter Leslie is seen by many as the culprit, starting with her relationship with her father. This was because Gene Hackman's successful career was the biggest reason he never got along with his first wife and children. You see, way back in the 60s, Leslie and her siblings, Christopher and Elizabeth, with their mother Faye, lived together in a modest New York apartment. During this time, Gene was trying hard to make a name for himself in the film industry. Slowly but surely, his hard work paid off through his role as Buck Barrow in Bonnie and Clyde in the 60s and Lex Luthor in DC's Superman movies in the late 70s and 80s. With most of his movies performing very well, Gene spent less and less time with his family. Movie shoots back then could last almost an entire year depending on the role he was given, meaning less time with his children. This continued until 2008 when Gene Hackman announced his retirement and was asked if he had other motivations aside from needing to rest as an older actor. There he opened up about how his successful career caused his family to gradually fall apart. He confessed that he was never around during his children's most critical moments. Special moments like when they learned to walk, their first day of school, and their graduation all went by without his presence. Their father couldn't be there for any of that. Gene went far enough to say that even though he had a family, he often took acting jobs with major roles that would separate them for 3 to 4 months at a time. This, according to Gene, created emotional distance with his children, including Leslie. He wished he had given them advice early on when they needed support and guidance the most. Gene's absence was so bad that it quickly became the biggest issue between him and Faye, so much so that they got divorced in 1986 for that reason. From when he married Betsy in 1991, Gene tried his best to restore his relationship with his children. Many reports tell us that his efforts were successful by late 2020, implying that the 90-year-old and his children were now getting along very well. However, it seemed odd that Leslie was getting along so well with her father, but was barely concerned enough to know more about his health. She spoke about this in an interview by thanking Betsy for keeping her father alive for so long, by talking him into practicing meditation and other mindful habits to improve his health. Other details, like why she wasn't present when neighbors and friends expected to be around, made people think she was trying very hard to stay away. On the surface, this seemed like people were nitpicking on her behavior before and after his death. But all that came to an end when they tried to prove how Leslie never showed natural worry or the sadness of a daughter in mourning as the others. She seemed very collected in her open statement compared to Christopher and Elizabeth, with answers that seemed to be more rehearsed than genuine. The mystery only deepens much more when we add that to the stories of her interest in the family's wealth. Some believe she had close connections with lawyers and businessmen who stood to gain if the estate was passed on in the ways they expected. Even though this on its own wasn't proven back then, it made people wonder if the whole thing was planned by her. Was her father's death part of a much larger scheme of greed and a silent lust for wealth? After all, why would Gene Hackman give over $80 million worth of property to charity without giving his children anything from it? These questions popped up at a time when the media was reporting on the estate getting tied up in legal battles. Other discussions were going on about who should receive the money if it doesn't go to charity as Gene intended. On top of that, while Leslie claimed she and her father were always in touch without seeing each other, the phone records show that there were huge gaps in communication between the father and daughter. Even though there might have been logical reasons for not being there for him, like loving him but not feeling too attached to someone who wasn't there for most of her childhood, why say something different to the public? What was she trying to hide by claiming she knew her father was in good health for months before his death when the evidence showed otherwise? More of these questions come up when we find out how everything fell into place in a way that only benefited the legal side of things for Leslie. The finding of her father's body and the investigation happened at a time that made it very easy for the estate issues to be addressed quickly. This was one of many reasons why people felt the order of events from the moment of discovery to the quick shutdown of the case could not be a mere coincidence. It seemed too arranged to be ruled off as bad luck for Gene and Betsy at the same time. All these things combine into a picture that is too difficult to ignore. The unusual family will, the gaps in her behavior, the quiet and calculated ways she spoke during talks, and the timing of events give the impression that there might be a darker side to the story with her name written all over it. As far as those believing this are concerned, blaming Leslie seems to solve a lot of the issues. This is because looking at the case without seeing her as a suspect raises a whole lot of questions. Let's examine a few of the questions investigators are still struggling with and why the answers we have don't add up. The estate battles and legal troubles. Before we move on, please keep in mind that some of the questions we are about to show you are haunting mysteries the investigators wrestled with for weeks. No one today claims to know the answers, and the questions on their own are quite disturbing. For one, if the reports tell us that Betsy likely died several days before Gene, then how long did he survive after she passed away? Why couldn't he call for help? Could his disease have grown so bad that he wasn't aware of when his wife was gone? The investigators wrestled with this because Alzheimer's doesn't just erase memories. Those living with elderly suffering extreme cases say that this disease bends reality for those going through it. And as of now, there is no way to know if Gene knew she was absent for almost a week or if he continued speaking to a version of her from his imagination. Had the disease gotten to the point where he was no longer able to act? As haunting as these questions are, The unsettling truth is they are just the tip of the iceberg. So let's dig a little deeper. The official reports also tell us that Betsy passed away from hantavirus disease.
For Miss Betsy Hackman, aged 65 years, is hantavirus pulmonary syndrome.
A serious infection spread by rodents. But if that is true, then why did the official story not mention any sign of rodent infestation in the house to prove their argument? The reports were exhaustive enough to list the names of those involved in the case, yet it made no mention of concerned calls from visitors who knew the disease came from rat infestations. There wasn't even a mention of a single pest control agency. It's easy to imagine that a luxurious home owned by an extremely private person should at least be checked regularly for rodent infestation. There is also something strange about the idea that two people, one of them being vibrant in public, could pass away in isolation. Gene was famous and Betsy had a lot of connections. Yet no one noticed they were gone until almost 2 weeks after death. It was like their desire to lead private lives had now become a silent trap. If it wasn't a case of abandonment, then why didn't anyone check in to see if the very old couple was doing all right? The legal battle also raised a lot of questions that investigators had to deal with. At a time when there were too many wrong theories about Gene's cause of death and the official reports didn't make sense, the family pushed back hard against releasing important information that could have been used by various agencies to crack the code on what was behind everything. What was their reason for doing this? And why did Leslie and the others go so far as making a court order to file a restriction on the same people helping them find answers? If it was about keeping the family's dignity, then why did nobody check on the old couple at such a critical time? If it was about avoiding public speculation, couldn't that have been fixed by giving more agencies a chance at solving this mystery? If there was a detail too painful and confusing to allow the public to see, couldn't that have been addressed without filing a restraining order? All the family's silence on this matter gave rise to more speculation and accusations, leading to the alleged arrest and sentencing of Gene Hackman's daughter, Leslie. Before the restraining order was filed and the authorities were forced to close the case, no signs were confirming that Gene tried to contact anyone after Betsy passed away. No 911 dials, no messages, and no notes. Even the large mailbox outside was collecting dust for days at that point. Knowing Gene's heart of gold, it is most likely that he tried to do something about the situation, but failed many times. Then when he noticed something was wrong and wanted to make his way outside to call for his wife or check on the mail, he collapsed on the ground and died from the inability to help himself in that position. What truly happened within that mansion after February 11th is still up in the air. Responding to the public backlash, Leslie asked everyone for privacy as she passes through this difficult season. The public obliged, but the situation went public once again when a civil court proceeding required Leslie to step into the public eye, not just as the daughter of a Hollywood legend, but as the legal heir to the Hackman estate. Ever wondered why the entire property hasn't been given off to charity as her father intended? Reports tell us that this is the reason. If Leslie wasn't the sole heir to her father's property, she wouldn't have been required by the legal system to testify on everything she knew about her parents' death and living conditions in the month before they passed away. The questions were pointed and precise, almost as if the defense attorneys believed she had failed her father by deliberately choosing not to check up on him despite his age. But even with lots of pressure on her shoulders, Leslie remained calm and answered every question the best way she knew how, according to reports. Her answers were the same from the very start. She always tried to remain connected to her parents, but had her commitments that couldn't be ignored. She couldn't afford a long-distance trip every month to visit her father. She claimed her commitments were just too much to handle. But even though her testimony aligned very well with what she had said to the authorities on the day after her father's body was reported by Jesse, it seemed the accusers had the upper hand for most of the trial. Interestingly enough, what happened right after the questioning isn't confirmed yet. Different official news sources tell different stories, and the narratives contradict themselves in so many ways that there is no compatible account of what happened in court today. Some say she was cleared of charges and did a good job of keeping to herself to avoid more scrutiny. Others claim she was arrested and given a light sentence under the condition that it wouldn't be made public until the case was settled. As for the other court battle on owning the estate, the legal proceedings lasted almost as long as this one and ended with Leslie inheriting a huge chunk of her father's property in the Hackman estate. Even with all public eyes on her as a suspect, she won the case with complete control over most of the agency her father left behind. And with stories of her arrest and sentencing waiting to be verified, time will tell what happened in that mansion on that day. So, what do you think? Is Leslie truly sentenced with no hope for the future, or is she resting easy in her home, dealing with her commitments? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Also, click on the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.